Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. And today's guest is Sir Stephen Wilkinson. Stephen is an investor in small and medium-sized enterprises and a leadership coach for visioning and creator of financial fluency courses for entrepreneurs. He's a writer, a trail walker, a libertarian, a Christian, a husband and father of four, and I think what he has to say will really interest you today. So, Stephen, welcome to the show, or perhaps I should say, Sir Stephen, welcome to the show.
Stephen will do.
I don't know how many sirs there are where you come from, but I imagine it's quite an honor to be considered a sir.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Well, today I really want to get into some of the challenges and a little bit of your background about how you got into this. But I know you work at the intersection of finance and leadership for small businesses. And I know you've been involved with an organization that I really respect, which is Small Giants, created by Bo Burlingham. He's a popular writer on Inc. magazine, and he wrote a book called Small Giants. And it's a huge thing in the entrepreneur world. So tell us a little bit maybe about your background with that, maybe about a little bit more about your background in finance.
Yeah, I will gladly. So, well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on your show, and I'm glad we had the occasion to chat and meet through our mutual friend John Janse, when he launched his new book recently.
Yep. Shout out to John Janse, author of Duct Tape Marketing and several other books. I think this one's called The Ultimate Marketing Engine.
It's a really good one.
Yeah.
It's a really good. I met John a few years ago, in fact, literally just before the COVID shutdown. We were both speaking at an event in Louisiana, an entrepreneurship retreat, and I got to know him there. He's a great guy, and along with Mike Michalowicz as well, who's another great author for small business.
Yeah, Profit First, very well respected in the entrepreneur and small business community. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So but you can tell from that sort of group of names that we've just sort of thrown up, that's the space that I'm in. It's that large pool of owners of small and medium-sized businesses, which is a very I'm going to say underserved area in the two disciplines that I think that I bring to the table. Number one is financial fluency. And effectively, that's how I started coaching and talking to leaders coming out of a restructuring investment business, buying companies that were in need of significant restructuring or possibly on the brink of insolvency or administration, where all the damage has already been done and the owner is starting to lose control of the business entirely because his financing partners, the bank, or just legal requirements are forcing him to sell the business and do something else with it.
Tough.
Usually very tough, very tough. And I've had years worth of conversations with business owners, mostly in Germany, because that's where I spent 25 years of my career in Germany. And Germany is a very interesting place. It has a completely different business and finance culture to the United States or the UK, where I come from. Much more long-term in thinking. The Germans are much, much more conservative when it comes to business finance. They're not nearly as, they tend to think generationally and in terms of legacy business.
Right.
They that has a lot to do with their history. But finance is one of those areas which is not part of the sort of normal repartee of a sort of small, medium-sized business owners. And I originally thought that was just a German thing. But I've realized over the last few years, particularly the more I spend time in the States talking to US business owners, and through my affiliation with a number of different networks, the Small Giants is one of them. Birthing of Giants, which has nothing to do with them, is another one based in New York. I think you know that organization too.
Vern Harnish was involved with that, I think. So teaching at it. So,
what I've realized is that discomfort and a lack of understanding around the point of finance and how to read a balance sheet and why it matters and how to use numbers to tell the story of the business it seems to be a universal issue. It doesn't matter whether you're in Germany or in Italy or in the US or in Argentina or in Japan, it doesn't make any difference. There is a real lack of understanding around the language of business. There is a lack of fluency around the language of business. And that's a pity, because I've always maintained that the very best strategic advisor that any business owner could have is in fact their own financial reporting, if only they could talk to it properly.
Well, I think it's a huge issue for me. And I don't think that I don't think there's a client that I work with that I don't look at the veracity of their financial statements, which you can pretty much tell I find I can tell by the presentation of them and the organization of them. Like, are they, I don't look to see if they have a good chart of accounts, but I look to see how many line items they have. And are they putting operating expenses that are really costs of goods sold into above the gross profit line? And do they understand the relationship of these things? Do they look at their labor costs and material costs and really understand it as a percentage of their income? And that's just the P&L statement, Then you get to the balance sheet, and I don't even think most small businesses even understand it, look at it, pay any attention to it.
The best comment that I've ever heard from a small business owner when he looked at his balance sheet is, "Why do I need that? I didn't pay for it."
That's great. Well, and they don't really understand it. And then, if you want to really understand the value of your business over time, you have to look at the balance sheet over time to see, is it accumulating in value, in equity? Or are you just, what are you doing? And you'll get a quick lesson when you go to the bank and try and get financing, maybe.
Well, yes and no, but the bank won't sit down and explain to you why they are judging you the way that they are.
Right.
You think you've got a great business, and this happens most dramatically at inflection points in growth. There's a when the business owner is growing rapidly and is starting to need larger and larger amounts of working capital, he's got more and more of his money tied up in accounts receivables or in inventory if he's a manufacturing business, and he doesn't understand. He's looking at his P&L, he's saying, I'm making money, but he doesn't know where it is. He has no idea why he's feeling poor, and yet his accounts are telling him he's making money. And that one point at where the businessman, the owner, thinks he's doing a really good job, and if the bank was prepared to lend him 500,000 2 years ago, well, then they've got to be prepared to lend me 2 million now when I really need it, because look, it's working. What they don't understand is that their risk profile is deteriorating every single day that they're growing at 10 or 15 or 20%. And that a lot of the financing that they need is typically not financing that a bank can give them, but nobody explains it to them that way.
Yeah,
So,
and a lot of this could be explained with the cash flow statement. Unfortunately, the cash flow statement, at least in the United States, I think that's GAAP compliant, is not easily understood and is rarely looked at. I don't actually know a small business owner that gets a balance sheet and a cash flow statement every month. So,
well, I think there's an issue with the fact that there are two different interpretations of cash flow statements or cash flow report. When a businessman or a business owner is talking about a cash flow report, he's talking about a forward-looking 12-week cash in, cash out.
Right. What
liquidity management tool.
Exactly.
When a financial person is talking about a cash flow statement, they're looking to see where's the money going in the business up to the point at which I'm examining it.
Right.
And the cash flow statement is fascinating for investors because it tells them or financing partners how much of the money being made is actually going to future-proof the business. How much is going into real long-term investments, because that tells you how much confidence the business has in its own future and what it's doing about it. So the cash flow statement from an investor or a financing perspective has a completely different thing to the one that the business owner thinks he's talking about when he's talking about cash flow.
Yeah, because the investor will look at the cash flow statement and understand, where did the money actually go? Did it get, did it increase your working capital, your current assets? Did it, did it go into inventory? Did it go into equipment or long-term expenses? So I think it's really instructive, and yet, it's just rarely looked at.
It's rarely looked at, and even if it is looked at, and if QuickBooks will produce you one, and it'll produce you one in the normal schedule with operational cash flow, financing, and investment cash flow, but it doesn't. Most people don't use it because it's not giving them the cash flow information that they need to run their business from a liquidity perspective.
Right.
But you originally asked a question about the Small Giants community, which is one of my absolutely favorite networks or communities that I'm involved in, and it's an amazing group of entrepreneurs with some wonderful people, and an inspirational group of leaders who are part of that community. And it started officially in 2009. Bo Burlingham, who became a friend very shortly after I read the book, and reached out to him while I was still in Germany and asked him to come over and give a speech around this concept of small giants, which I immediately resonated with, and I wanted sort of my business community to listen to the author talking about it. So we got him over to Germany, and we went on a little tour of some speaking engagements for about a week and a half, and we became very good friends during that time. And he invited me back to the conference, which I'd never been to before. And I remember that distinctly because it was 2007 in Washington. And during the last day of the conference, all the Inc. 500, all the people who were on the Inc. 500 list got a present from American Express, who were rolling out. Do you still have the plum card? The plum colored.
I don't know. I'm not an Amex guy, but yeah.
Okay, well,
I remember the plum card. Yeah, sure.
Well, Amex were rolling it out in 2007, and they had a gift for every single person in the auditorium.
Yes,
which was a brand new iPhone, which had literally just hit the market, and I remember that distinctly. So that was 2007, and in 2009. A group of friends who had sort of coalesced around Bo and the book, a number of whom had been portraited in the book, decided that we needed to do more than just meet at the Inc. 500 conference and have a good dinner, but we should do something about this. And we met in Ann Arbor, at Zingerman's, which
Yes,
you may have heard of Zingerman's.
Yeah, sure.
Famous deli and food business.
Yes.
Ari Weinzweig and his partner Paul Snaggenar were our hosts, and they were also featured in the book. And in fact, I think if you ask Bo, he will say they were the inspiration for the book, and this whole idea of running a business differently based on developing the culture rather than growth per se. And Ari entertained us for 2.5 days in Ann Arbor, during which we wrote a vision of what we wanted the Small Giants community to be. And that was in May of 2009. And since then, it's sort of grown. It's had a sort of period at the beginning when it was, we had a lot of fun, and it was a rapid growth, and everybody who had read the book coalesced around it. And we had a sort of phase where it didn't really do very much. And in the last, I'd say 5 years, we've had a new sort of management team running the organization, and they've done it from Detroit, and they've done a fantastic job. It's a really vibrant
tell us
community.
what it is exactly. So and can anyone join it? And what is it? What's the elevator pitch for Small Giants?
It's the elevator pitch is the subtitle of the book. It's for companies that choose to be great instead of big.
Gotcha.
So it's about creating an organization that Bo refers to as intimate or human scale, instead of going hell for leather and for as much growth as you can get. So it's for leaders and their organizations who are interested primarily in preserving and building out the culture and growing at a pace that doesn't damage or interfere with the intimacy of the culture.
I think that's great. I love it. So what do you have any insight into what percent of those businesses are either family owned or run, or have a strong family focus to them?
I'm going to throw the question back at you and ask, what do you mean by family focus? Does that mean it has to be with the idea of handing it on to the next generation, or where there are current members of the family involved in the organization?
Yeah.
What does family mean?
So family run or family owned, or I would say, or as more than one family member involved in the business. And
so that could be a husband and wife?
Absolutely. Definitely. That's a family business. And I think family focused is a lot of businesses want to show that they have what I think you describe as like family values. And that family values means that they have a strong culture of loyalty to their employees. They treat their people like family. And I think that this is a double-sided, like a blessing and a curse, because I think it can get you into trouble a little bit, because loyalty that's misplaced can be very damaging to a culture. As you're shaking your head, I'm sure you agree.
We could have a whole podcast or two just on the dangers that companies get in, or the problems that companies get into when they mix the two systems, family and business.
Right.
So, and I've seen this in sort of patriarchal companies, with very wealthy business owners, but they don't have to be wealthy. They just need to be old and stubborn and reasonably successful. And what they will do is they will mix the two value systems.
Right.
So they will treat employees in a way that they will treat their employees like family members, and they will treat their family members like employees. And there is a lot of psychological research that's gone, or systemic research gone into why families are fundamentally different from businesses. And that if you start mixing or conflating the two, then you get into tremendous difficulty, because nobody really knows who they are anymore in the system. Right. And elderly patriarchs are the worst of all at doing this.
100%.
They mix up all the systems. They can, and it can lead to children, the real children, feeling so dispossessed that they've get suicidal. This can lead to tremendous difficulty. So I'm very wary of this sort of cuddly idea that somehow a business and a family are the same thing, and that you could treat all your employees like family members. I think family values, of respect and decency and some sort of equanimity, they have their place in a business. But a really sound business culture will recognize that it's run on entirely different rules.
Yeah,
and you have to know them.
Yeah, and I think, one of the exercises that I've taken my clients through that I think helps with that is, especially if I'm dealing with the patriarch, is to put them into the organization chart on a physical written chart or virtual on a software, and let them see the different boxes or seats that they sit in, and let them speak from the position of, I'm speaking to you as, the director of sales, or I'm speaking to you as the owner of this business, or I'm speaking to you as your father in this situation, and kind of be clear where you're coming from. I find it so important when I'm transitioning or helping a company transition from one generation to the next, that the patriarch or matriarch speaks from the and clarifies the place that they're speaking from. I think that helps.
Absolutely. And if you get that wrong, it causes chaos.
Mm-hmm.
It's just chaos in the systemic relationship structure of both the family and the business. It's very, very unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I think coaches and leadership coaches can do both the family and the business a great service by helping navigate that minefield, especially if it's sort of grown up over 20, 30 years and it's already well established. Sort of unpicking it and putting it back in its place again is probably one of the best things that a leadership coach can do with a patriarch or
So I think this is a good segue to talking about visioning and the visioning process that you use. We had an earlier conversation about it. I think it sounded very interesting. I'd love it if you could describe a little bit about that visioning process that you go through with clients.
I'd love to do that. I first discovered it from that meeting in Ann Arbor in 2009. From Ari, who put us through this process of visioning where we wanted to be with the organization in 5 years' time. And Ari learned this method from a consultant that was very close to the University of Michigan, where there's a very well-respected organizational psychology department. That consultant, a guy called Stas Kazmierski, came into the organization, Zingerman's, at a fairly late stage, but was responsible for establishing visioning as a key leadership tool. And I believe, and if you ask Ari, he will tell you that this tool by itself has been one of the strongest levers that he and his partner have had in actually shaping the organization and driving it forward. And what is it? Well, everybody sort of knows what a vision is roughly. It's some sort of idea about the future, but the way that organization psychologists have created this process around it, it's very specific, and it is a narrative in text, in prose, written in the present tense, at a very specific time in future. Let's say 5 years, on the 15th of November, 2025 or 2026. We are going to be envisioning, we're in a partnership, and we say, let's just envisage what success is for us, how we define that, how will we know if we've been successful? And you and I would sit down and we would both write as much as possible, as fast as possible, get it out of our heads and hearts into prose, and then spend a couple of weeks kicking it backwards and forwards so that both of us in our joint venture were absolutely clear on what success means for us. And if you wanted to have, if whatever our business venture was, if your idea was to have a continent-wide franchise system, and I wanted to have for me, success was just having a single store, specialty, highly profitable lifestyle business, well, then we would figure that out very quickly because our intentions would be entirely different. So the idea is to get out that sort of that woolly, unclear, emotional stroke, aspirational idea of what the entrepreneur thinks is how he would define success, and make that visible for the rest of the organization and the community of people surrounding the organization, so that everybody knew where we were going. And to do that in detail, it has to be inspiring. It has to be in a sort of narrative form. So you have to be able to read it. It's usually somewhere between 5 and 7 pages if you've done it properly, sometimes longer. Just finished one with a client who's went to 21 pages, and it's fantastic.
Wow.
So it's a really readable, exciting document that has already moved the needle on that particular business's relationship with the town. They're in a big city. And for the very first time, the city officials who are responsible for grants and for sort of supporting the business can now see what the business owners see as far as that area is concerned. And if you do it well, it is not only inspiring, but it's also effectively the logical extrapolation of the business model. So it's got a hard core, which is the financial reality of the business model, wrapped in this aspirational, what sort of business do we want, and what sort of impact have we had, and how does it work, and how does what's our reputation, and what sort of customers do we have, and where are we, and how many people are we, and what sort of a culture do we aspire to. And because you make all that visible and then share it with the organization so that everybody has a chance to contribute to it in the business, you then have this vision document that everybody has had a chance to contribute to and has been asked to contribute to, so that everybody knows where the journey is heading towards. So you've got a destination. You've got a destination map, and it's a fantastic leadership tool because it's.
So I think this is great. I want to dive into this a little bit more because I've done much of this in my own personal life at personal development workshops, whether they be with Tony Robbins or Jack Canfield or T. Harbeck or just personal optimum performance type personal development workshops, where you actually write out in a future state, what does your life look like, or what does your business look like? So I think it's a great exercise. I really highly recommend this exercise for partners so that they can make sure they're on the same page with each other. What you've just said and shared with me is that you get a lot more than just the partners or the founders to contribute to this document. And I want to ask how you do that, but I also want to ask what techniques or tactics or tools do you use for people who are stuck? They have trouble coming up with the vision. I see this all the time in my coaching, right? It's like I ask, give me some specific measurable results that you want to achieve in 3, 6, 12 months from now. And some people can fill out a long, 2 pages. Some people are just like 3 items. So,
and some people find it so difficult that they just shut down because it's completely counterintuitive to the way that they run the business. And there are many entrepreneurs, and I will answer your question very specifically, but many entrepreneurs are visionary, but actually their visioning is more like a lot of self-confidence and optimism that the future is going to be better than the past. Don't ask me any details. It's just going to be great.
Yes.
and if you say, well, what does great mean? Then they collapse because that's not how they run their world. They run their world very opportunistically. How do I know what's going to come up next week or next month or tomorrow? And I'll figure it out when I get there. That you can do that, but you can't bring anybody along on that journey other than through absolute loyalty and belief in your genius, which is a great place to be if you want to be there, but it's not a very sustainable way of making people autonomous within the business because they know exactly where you're going. So there are 3 things that I do with all visionary leaders or people who are going through this process with me. And by the way, it takes about 4 to 5 months to get this process completely done. So this is not something you can do on an afternoon workshop and we're done.
Right.
The real work is in the iteration.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've done these in the afternoon workshops, and you don't come out with that much. And then you end up looking at it maybe a few months later and you think, oh, that was pretty much garbage.
Yeah.
Not much there.
3 things. Number 1, and I suspect this is the most important of the steps. Number 1, write down everything that is wrong, challenging, difficult, problematic, frustrating about the business today. Because a vision is nothing other than a change management process or document. So the change state that you're envisioning will be automatically and logically the solution to all today's problems. So what you're doing is you're writing down all the problems, you're not sorting them in any particular order, and then writing a sentence opposite them. So you get a bit of paper, column down the middle, or 2 or 3, and you just write down every single problem that you've got. And business people are really, really good at dumping a catalog of all the things that are frustrating them. And there is no issue with that whatsoever.
Right. Exactly.
Where they need a little bit of help, just 1 or 2 exercises just to show them what I mean, is to turn that on its head, to invert it.
Yeah.
So I've got, today we only have one major supplier, and he charges us too much and he's unreliable.
Right.
And the inverse of that, we have a full range of suppliers with whom we have working, trusting relationships with excellent pricing, and just-in-time delivery, something like that. So you would sit down, you go through every single one of the problems you've listed and write the inverse.
Yes. I love that. That's great. Like, what if the opposite were the case?
What's the opposite of the case? Because effectively, change management is taking an unsatisfactory situation and turning it into a satisfactory one. So if you aggregate all of your unsatisfactory situations, you automatically get a picture, like a jigsaw puzzle, with quite a few of the bits filled in of what an ideal situation would look like. Let's say you've got a crappy culture. Well, then you would describe in some detail what a happy culture looks like, and so on. Or your profitability is miserable, and then you write down what good profitability looks like.
Great.
So that's the first exercise, and that fills in an awful lot of blanks. Because what we then do is take each one of those and start grouping them under headings. There'll be supply chain issues, and there'll be culture issues and management issues and financial issues and all sorts of things. So you've got chapters are starting to form just by you writing down all your problems and inverting them. So that's number 1. Number 2, I ask the business leaders to write down 10 to 20 attributes of a business in their business field that a successful business needs to do really well. In other words, I ask the question, what does a successful business in your field have to do really well in order to be very successful? And by doing that, what they're doing is benchmarking themselves. They're creating an anonymous benchmark by saying, because most people are, once it's not about them, they can say, okay, what does a really good competitor look like? Well, they're really good at supply chain, or they're really good at manufacturing efficiency, or they're really good at marketing, or whatever it is. And then you get these sort of 20, 18, 15 key attributes. And then I ask them to score themselves today and where they think they're going to be at the point of visioning and where they were 2 years ago. And then you've got this, they can start seeing areas of progress on a scale of 0 to 10.
Right.
And that then becomes the map, because the vision document will describe what it feels like to be a first-class organization based on their own criteria. So they will be able to.
Are they prioritizing each of these areas in stage?
They tend to. They tend to be. They tend to be grouped. So there's sort of personnel issues and supply chain issues, and so that there's not really a hierarchy so much as a map of things that they've got to do in their entirety. So that's the third thing. And the third thing I will do is is to ask them what the guiding principles or values of the business are, and to tell me. So they write them down. So let's say there are 5 values. They're usually fairly boring or not particularly well thought out or superficial. And I say, okay, if you live those values over the visioning period, how do I know that? How do I know that those are your values? How have those values made a difference in the organizational culture? So, how do I know that those are your values, and what's the compound effect of living them over the next 4 or 5 years? That's slightly more difficult, but at the end of the day, each one of those values has got some sort of implicit behaviors and principles embedded in them that have a real practical implication on the culture of the business. So logically, you should be able to say, well, if you keep living this value for the next 5 years and insisting on it, and using it as a tool to measure behavioral acceptance, then it should have this consequence. And you can sort of pick 5 or 6, and now you've got the future state of the business due to its values. You've got the future state of the business based on the benchmark of excellence, and you've got the future state of the business against as the answer to all of today's problems. And with all of that information, you suddenly get a picture, and that picture then needs to be put into the language that the owner of the business is comfortable with, and then the business model has to work. So you've got all these sort of various bits and pieces coming in. You can see most leaders have attention deficit disorder.
Right.
So they can't do this for longer than an hour without getting bored.
Right.
Which is why it takes 3 to 4 months, because I said we do this an hour a week, and we'll move it forward. And after 3 months, we've got enough draft, and they've got used to it. And once they can see it on paper, something magic happens. Once they can see their own language and their own narrative, and they can read it, then it suddenly starts to make sense to them. And then they start engaging with it and playing with it. And it takes maybe 2 or 3 weeks of more work. And then it's ready to go into the organization. And then there are 2 phases. Phase number 1, they bring the sort of next level of management or the sort of the inner circle, give them their draft, and get them to give really hard feedback. What's missing? What have we missed? What's not inspiring enough? What doesn't make sense? That usually yields a lot of sort of gaps in the narrative.
Yeah.
Where people have said, we need to think about this, or you haven't mentioned this, or what about this area? And that then sort of fills it with their content. And then you take it in a sort of next step, depending on how large the organization is, to the broader group. And at that point, you can either create slice teams, which are groups of people from every part of the organization, and get them together to work on the vision. And depending on how large the organization is, that can take another 2 or 3 weeks. And when that's ready, then you send it to maybe 3 or 4 intimate advisors who are not in the business, who you trust as a leader, and say, what do you think of this? And when that's done, and they've given their feedback, which always yields some valuable insights, then they have to publish it. And the publishing means is actually physically either putting it into a book form, putting it on the internet, on their webpage. And then there's a really important part, which is to celebrate it and manifest it, to have a sort of vision launch party with a t-shirt or a hat and a poster, because what needs to happen is that the vision needs to stay, to be visible throughout the next few years. It mustn't disappear somewhere. So by having a physical manifestation and getting the team to come up with an idea of, a teddy bear or a hat or a t-shirt, and celebrating it and making sure that those sort of artifacts of the vision are constantly visible in the office space, that's the way that you get the buy-in and move it forward. So it becomes a very intimate idea of what success looks like for us in the business. And my experience has been, and I'll finish, has been that the more work that's put into that vision and creating a really clean, inspiring, strategically sound narrative, the more likely the business is to not only achieve it, but exceeded and before time.
Wow. I love your description of this whole visioning process and how you've elaborated on a process that I've intuitively done, but at a much smaller scale and not as orchestrated. And so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
And that's a far ways from where I thought we were going to be talking about, which was finance. And so how do we weave
finance is a really important
finance
part
into this?
Yeah, well, it's really important because the vision is, imagine it's like a peach.
Yeah.
There's a sort of soft narrative on the outside, which is a touchy-feely, and it's emotional and it's intimate and it's descriptive. But in the center of it, there has to be a rock-hard business model validation. It has to work as a financial model. And I have this sort of joke or saying, which is that the business plan, the 5-year business plan that Excel will spit out for you in an afternoon, the 5-year business plan, or any business plan that goes into the future, is the love child between a business model and a vision. If you mate a vision and a business model, you will get the plan. If you do the plan without reference to the vision, then it's just numbers. And if you do it without reference to the business model, then it's just stupid. So you have to have the financial understanding of what the business vision that you've created actually means in terms of getting there.
Right. So tell me a little more detail. So in the vision, is there discussion of what your
finance?
Gross margins?
Absolutely. That's a core.
Are we looking at? Are there a lot of ratios that are in like that? That
might be
in there. Yeah. So it might even talk about your working capital ratios. We were talking about
absolutely.
Earlier, or how much cash is on. I mean, obviously, you probably would say, well, how much cash is in the bank? How much cash? What's the value of our balance sheet on?
You would say something. You would say something like, in year 5, we're proud of having repaid all our startup loans.
Right.
We now have at least 8 months cash in the bank.
Right.
Our gross margins have moved from 48% to 63%. And you will be very specific about what financial success looks like, because there's no point in having a business vision if it doesn't include a measure of financial success, because otherwise it's just fantasy.
Okay, so what level of resistance do you get from clients? Now, I know you have probably some entrepreneurial clients, and they're, some of them you said are ADD, or many of them, or most. And so they're driven by that resistance, which is, I got to get back to work. This is like, sort of like sandbox playing. And then there's some people who are just probably going to have a lot of resistance. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of time invested in this. It's a very woo-woo kind of an exercise.
No, it's not.
For some.
It's not the way I do it. It isn't, because I can tell you, I've been chairman of a number of public companies. I know how to deal with my CEOs, and I always tell them, listen, just for the next 4 to 5 months, I'm your chairman. And you and I are going to have a conversation that you need to have with me as your chairman, because I've got a board that I need to get on board. And so you need to be as honest as possible with me, and it's going to hurt. I say quite frankly up front, there are phases on the next 3 months that are really going to hurt, because it's not something that you're used to doing. And particularly for entrepreneurs there are 2 different types. There's the entrepreneur that sets up goals and knocks them out.
Yep.
So the future becomes a series of, so a 5-year future becomes a series of 20 quarterly goals. And all I'm saying is, why don't you just start at the end and work the goals back from there, rather than just putting up the goals and saying, I'm going to do this quarter's goals and next quarter's goals and next quarter's goals. And there are some people who are really good at that and who find starting with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey called it, really difficult. But once they've understood it, they can then sort of create the goal series, reverse engineer it backwards. And there are others for whom the future is always a sort of, unicorn-shaped, fluffy, beautiful place where they're driving a Ferrari and they've got their yacht, but they can't actually be specific about it.
Right.
And they're not very good at goals either, but they're very charismatic and they're really good at sort of getting people enthusiastic. For them and for the others, there are different challenges, but I say to them, it's going to hurt because this requires a level of specificity that is going to mature you as a leader. Because going from short-term goals or short-term enthusiasm to long-range planning and stating what it is that you actually want, what success means for you, and stopping the entrepreneur from saying, well, how am I going to get it? Because the how question is irrelevant in the vision. The how is what you figure out once you've created the vision. Mm-hmm. That's the job of sort of day-to-day operations. And getting them to ignore that is basically why, and I'm going to say this with all humility, why I'm really good at this and why others may find it more difficult. Because I feel myself in the role of chairman, and my job is to get that vision out of them, come what may. It's like giving birth. I'll get it out if they keep pushing.
So would you recommend, for people who wanted to get started on this process, would you recommend they read Ari Weizenzweig's book on Zingerman's Deli? And it's like a manifesto, as I recall. Was it like a 500 page?
There are a number of resources that they can tap into. I write about visioning in my newsletter and on my webpage quite a lot.
Okay.
And on LinkedIn, they can and I write about all this stuff regularly.
Okay.
They can buy Ari's book from the zingtrain.com website, and he's written a series of 4 books, and it's number 1 that you need, and that has 2 essays on visioning, and that's a sort of do-it-yourself version, which is fine. I do not believe, from years of doing this, I do not believe that an entrepreneur or a business owner will do the visioning process by himself.
I agree.
So that it works. I just don't. You can do it, and you don't need me, and I've got enough resources that you can do it by yourself.
Right.
The reason that we exist as coaches is because they need somebody to guide them through, keep the discipline going, and who will take some of the work off them.
Yeah.
That's simple.
So they can subscribe to you, and they can find you at Stephen with a V at goodandprosper.com.
At goodandprosper.com. Yeah.
Okay. Or Stephen with a V again, Wilkinson, on LinkedIn. And so do you have a tool that you make available, you share with people? That's a basic tool that gets their feet wet a little bit, or?
In the visioning, I don't, but okay. I'm working on one at the moment. And if people are interested, listening to your podcast, and they're interested in having it, then if I get more than one DM that says I'd like to have that, I'll do it.
Sounds good. Awesome. Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I think it's so instructive. I'm going to go back, I know, and listen to this so that I really understand each of those 3 steps in the process. And maybe we can just repeat and revisit them. It's the first step is kind of do a what's not working kind of
problem list.
Yeah, deep list. Then the second is to sort of group them into different areas, as I understood, and create like what it would look like if, and this is where you're benchmarking against maybe the best, what it would look like to have all these areas working great. And help me with the third step.
The values.
Right. Incorporating, right. Which is really, that was a leap of faith for me to like, okay, how do we connect our purpose and our values? And how do they get lived such that
it make a difference.
It make a difference, but that we're executing on this vision is really what I think.
The vision becomes part of the vision itself is is the answer to the question, if we live our values, how does that over 5 years, how does that affect how the business looks?
Got it.
Because if it doesn't affect it at all, then why bother?
Got it. Yeah. Wow. Love to read the 21-page dissertation that your client wrote on his. It's quite it would be like, that'd be quite a feat, but I get how you want to keep it down to a handful of pages. And are there examples of companies besides Zingerman's, where they've done this type of a thing, maybe even intuitively before people started to call it visioning processes? I mean, let's not go back to the Greek gods or the Roman Empire, but maybe. Yeah,
for sure. And any time a business sets out its idea for the future. I mean, Apple has been instrumental. It's been brilliant at doing that.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, whether they have a formal document that meets the criteria that I would describe to a vision, this vision is a very loose term, and some people mix it up with vision or a mission or strategy. I have a very specific idea, and most of the people that I've worked with actually publish their vision on their websites.
Wow.
Because making it public is part of the commitment.
I get that. I mean, they always teach you in these workshops that I've been to, like, if you're going to state some future goals, like, declare it in an affirmative language, put it out there, share it with others, which is part of the process of building like an accountability team around you to help you to make it happen. So
none of this is really new, and anybody who's sort of spiritually organized knows that the power of prayer and the power of the law of attraction are all based on being clear about what you want in the future. And this is the business version of that.
Interesting. So super interesting. Love it. I mean, we've just barely touched on finance stuff, but like I think about the early days of business planning back in the 80s and 90s. And, I think I used to start with just the finance section, because it was like, let's get the numbers down and then we'll figure out how we're going to get the marketing and the operations. And it always fascinated me, because I'd have a colleague and he'd go, no, let's get the marketing down and then figure out what the finance that flows out of this. And so these were early examples of us helping our clients come up with visions for their business. And so,
and it was always Excel based.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I never saw a business plan that lost money on paper. Didn't make sense, right? But or it would lose money.
I never saw one in the sort of startup arena. I don't really have very much to do with startups, but I never saw one that didn't end up after 5 years having in cash the gross national product of Ecuador on its balance sheet.
Yeah, quite interesting. So
okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been really fun.
Stephen, thanks so much for being on the show. And folks, I hope you'll share this with people that can benefit from it. And stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show.
This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful, so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.